With the trailer for Creed 2 coming out recently, and by recently I mean months ago, there's no better time to review the sequel to Rocky 40 years on. Well, I could have done it 6 weeks ago, but the thing about doing sequels, even review sequels, is they're hard. You know why? Expectation, time, more variables and interest to juggle. Trying to be a continuation, but also trying to be original, but still have the winning formula of the first. But mostly, expectation. Expectation kills greatness. And cut! Let's go again. There's a total contrast to the opening of the first film. The sound and colour is vibrant, almost turbocharged, and the contrast to the soundtrack of grunts and efforts in the first film compared to the emotional Bill Conti's score brings the audience right back in seconds to the climactic end of the fight. They don't edit this. The start of this film is the last 6 minutes of the previous film. They start at the 14th round. We need to witness again where the resurrection happened, and as crucially for this film, the moment when Apollo realized that he could not dominate. We need to be plunged back into that world again. And the emotion in this scene is so strong that it completely overrides the logic. I mean, the challenger is standing in the corner of the ring. His assumption is that she is in the changing room. He's shouting over the chaos like a trapped animal calling for its mother rather than just leaving the ring. Logically, she wouldn't hear him in a stadium, but it's so primitive and innocent that we accept it. We don't get a recap of previously on Rocky. We get treated to a replay of the moments when the perfect combination of everything happened. The graphic representation of bliss. Total, all-encompassing happiness and love. They love themselves and each other. So where do you go from momentary bliss? This film explores that question. Can one heroic act define us? If the first film is a fairy tale, this is a real-life drama. The first film is about making the right decisions, taking an opportunity, and changing your life. This film is about what happens after the fairy tale. Because as much as we might like to dream that one act might permanently change our lives, it doesn't. We have to keep changing our lives one act at a time. The first film is a love story with boxing in it. This film is a drama with boxing in it. And the titles deal with the real-world consequences of putting your health in jeopardy. This film is about what you will face once you've fought to get your life into some kind of order, and the more realistic issues that we will all deal with of risk assessment. And it also looks at the very difficult issue of the male animal side coexisting in a relationship with a woman. And for the first time, we are introduced to a true antagonist in the shape of Apollo Creed. He has morphed from the fairy godfather granting the wishes to the villain. Initially, he was a supporter of sorts, and it's not uncommon in a group dynamic that you can be accepted into the group to serve a function. In this case, because of his low status, Rocky posed no threat. However, beware to not upset the hierarchy. When Rocky imposed order on his life, he created massive disorder in Apollo's. And Apollo was not crazy to try this stunt. If in sport success goes to those with the highest order, be it genetic, physical, mental, emotional, and environmental, Apollo was right to assume that his ordered existence would be no match for Rocky's disordered life. But in the 5 weeks between the idea and the fight, Rocky introduced massive amounts of order into his life. In competition, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Your order creates somebody else's chaos. You get your act together, and somebody else, somewhere else, will be having their act torn apart. And if you see the world as a competitive environment, then this is definitely the case. Apollo's anger is the manifestation of the hurt he feels to his pride and reputation. If Rocky was the story of building Rocky's self-esteem, Rocky 2 is also a story of what happens when your self-esteem is destroyed. Paulie's represented Rocky's shadow, and if Rocky improves, Paulie improves. Rocky's move up the ladder means Paulie can take Rocky's position in life as a collector, and Rocky is comfortable now giving up that position because he has abundance in his own life. As Rocky asks Apollo, high on drugs, whether he gave him his best, Apollo answers honestly, revealing no genuine malice in him. He's a child reacting to hurt, not an evil man with a plan. What we will witness in the film is Apollo's struggle to get back order and his perceived place in the hierarchy. Interesting to me is that he actually won. The record books will record a win, but Apollo, as the heavyweight champion and master showman, is still no more than a mental slave to the crowd. Rocky II dispels the myth in the first film that they lived happily ever after. He goes down the accepted path to happiness with marriage and a child, but what he faces is the stark and dark realities of life. In the real world, economic and health struggles rear their heads and identity struggles persist. Rocky's marriage proposal is a good example of multiple motivations. He's continuing on one hand to make good decisions. He's continuing to try to introduce order, but he also seems to want to try to keep chasing that natural high, that dopamine hit. He's effectively been with Adrian for 8 to 10 weeks. It's not that he's rushing into marriage, he just isn't aware that marriage is more than just love. It's the organizing of two people's lives together. He's only just got his own life into some kind of order over a month period. Financially, he made $37,000. This is just a hypothesis, but given Rocky's character, it's likely he would have offered at least to pay Garzo back the $500 he gave him for the training expenses. Firstly, Garzo's a moneylender, and secondly, later in the film when Garzo offers to re-employ Rocky, there's no mention of money from previously. That freedom comes from being debt-free. But even if it was purely a gift, again, Garzo offering the possible reinvestment in condominiums and Rocky not even understanding the concept of investment shows he's been given resources without the sense gained to use it. Normally, when somebody gets money, it's because they've made good financial decisions to accrue that money. If you get money without the process of learning, it's more likely you're going to make bad decisions. He's given a financial opportunity and he doesn't take it. Back at his old flat, the difference is noticeable because Adrian has brought some order to his home environment. And in this way, Rocky is taking the path of the average guy that he has been told will lead him to sustained happiness. He's got married. He buys material possessions, a house, car, coats, watches. Adrian is, in this case, more qualified to make the correct decisions regarding these, but he charms her with his simplicity. His high levels of confidence undermine her expertise in these areas of financial management, and they pay for this later. This illustrates how important it is to divide labor in a marriage, sensibly giving the most qualified the responsibility. It also demonstrates how difficult that can be, as these are Rocky's winnings, and if she causes friction at this stage, it might sour their relationship and potentially emasculate him. But this is an example of love clouding good judgment. In the meantime, Apollo is in a hell of his own making, because we've finally seen his weakness. People's opinion of him matters that much. His self-esteem has been challenged because he has lost the love and nurture of the people. This means that he feels hurt and he wants to hurt back. Others' opinions can turn a victory into a defeat if you let them. Meanwhile, for Rocky, the problem with a quick jolt to your self-esteem is that it doesn't last. He's already falling back into his old patterns and characterizing himself as a wise guy. Humility is a virtue, but it's not to be confused with low self-esteem. Humility is knowing your true worth, but choosing to represent it as lower to others in order to not make them feel bad. Rocky is just devaluing his worth. The advert demonstrates being good in one field doesn't equate to being good in another, especially if you don't have the basic skills for life from school like reading and writing. This then encourages him to try to raise himself on the hierarchy, but with the diversity of labor, each profession has its own hierarchy now. Being world-class in boxing doesn't present options in the business world, meaning that now, as Rocky has given up his place in his old profession, collecting, he has to take Paulie's job packing meat. In this role, he's doing what is necessary and displays a level of true humility in a mundane, repetitive job that his shadow character used to do. He does it with more dignity and conscientiousness though, and is rewarded with being laid off. To me, this is a commentary on the economic climate of the times. A hard-working man should be able to keep a job that he does well. The land of opportunity has let him down. The reality of Rocky's world, and the reason why this is not a fairy tale, it's a drama, is that he doesn't have a lot of opportunities. He is at the mercy of his lack of skills and the economy. And that's why he starts to consider fighting again. This is not an illogical conclusion. He was a club fighter previously because he operated at his best in the ring and wants to play to his strengths. But Adrian is against his fighting, saying he doesn't need to fight. He promised he had given it up. She doesn't want him to. His possible disability. She is driven by her fear and her low self-confidence. She fed off his self-confidence in the beginning of their relationship, but now, as his confidence diminishes, she doesn't naturally have the self-confidence to deal with the anxiety of real-world issues. And this is the problem with him marrying too fast. Their influence on each other isn't great enough yet to make meaningful, healthy changes. She's not been able to nurture him enough so that he doesn't need to seek his self-esteem elsewhere, like boxing, and Rocky hasn't been able to give her enough self-confidence to overcome her anxiety and fear in the world. And here is the first time that she is wrong. She says, you can be what you want, but Rocky's experience confirms this isn't true. She also uses guilt with the line, "You gave me your word," which is a manipulative strategy designed to appeal to his sense of honor. Adrian is right-minded though in offering to get a job, and Rocky's lack of ego about it, even though he accepts the convention of the day that he's supposed to support, still has an effect on eroding his self-esteem further, which is why we see that small flash of anger as he hits the bag. In this case though, he's hitting out against the economy, and he knows that that's a fruitless fight. His journey back to the gym and to Mickey is a search for a parental figure again and another answer. If Adrian can't help his esteem, maybe Mickey, a father figure, can help his confidence. This situation is further reinforced though when Mickey greets him as the prodigal son, the wasteful, extravagant son. And actually he's not wrong. Rocky has squandered his winnings. Adrian has said she doesn't want him to fight, and so Rocky goes to his other parent to see if he can get him on side. And Mickey reiterates in his harsh truth exactly what Adrian said. There is a realistic danger of permanent injury. And then we see Rocky's true situation. In asking to just be around the gym, not as the athlete of old, but as the lowest level worker, he's desperate. He needs some remnant of a hit of his old success, and he's willing to sacrifice his dignity. This is not the virtue of humility. Genuine, virtuous humility is knowing you are the center of the universe, but choosing to make others the center of your universe because you realize it doesn't matter. Rocky is trying to revisit a place where previously he was the center of his universe, to catch a glimpse of that ghost to ease his pain. This is not a virtue. This is an addict. In the meantime, Apollo has his own self-esteem issues, but is able to be more proactive in his resolution because he has more resources as the champion. Tony is trying to get him to think about the money without realizing Apollo has been hurt by accusation and insult. This is essentially because Apollo's standard is not just winning, it's domination. He's using boxing as a way to fuel his ego, and he's become locked into the approval of the crowd. His sense of self is so tied into what they think of him. This is very dangerous. When he asks Tony what he's afraid of, Tony admits to being afraid of the challenge. This is honest, but it's the wrong answer. His reiteration that, "Let it go, you're the champ," will not outweigh the crowd, and Tony has now introduced the concept to Apollo that he may not be able to dominate this man ever. Apollo goes for the humiliation tactic, which is effective on a person with low self-esteem like Rocky. Wars start because of scarcity. If one person feels hurt because you have something they don't, an option is always to rechannel that hurt. This is what Apollo's doing, rechanneling the hurt he feels and directing it towards Rocky. He's constructing the framework for war. Adrian's nurture instincts, her need to protect, which are on the self-esteem side, are her motivating force, combined with her fear on the other side, which is appropriate due to the health risks. She's looking out for his best interests. As Rocky returns to the gym, he notices that his reputation is tarnished, and the crowd is fickle. They don't defend him from the ad, they turn on him too. Apollo wants Rocky to exactly feel his pain. Apollo never respected Rocky, except for that moment in the 14th round, and his goodwill has turned sour. He wishes nothing but bad will. Rocky is stuck though because he needs to continue to respect Apollo, because pulling Apollo down reduces Rocky's achievement. This is something to be aware of in competition. There are many reasons to appear to be a good sportsman or nice before the race. Ask yourself though, is it genuinely because you're a good person, or is there an ulterior motive? Are you setting up in your mind the excuses beforehand for why it's okay to lose? If you pull them down and you still lose, what does it say about you? At least if you elevate them and then you lose, it justifies the loss. Are you doing it because really you have something more to lose by really challenging than just losing itself? Is your identity tied up with the winner being great? You know, like it would be with a famous training partner. Do you think that the loss could actually hurt more if you genuinely thought that you could win? And so therefore you sabotage yourself in order to reduce the possible future pain. But most, are you just afraid of being impolite or aggressive because you're afraid of how that's going to be perceived by others? We're socialized to be polite and conciliatory, but there's no place for that in competition. Play by the rules, yes, but don't confuse that with being nice. Competition is the place for your more primitive side to be exercised. We then see the return of Garzo, his kind father who led him astray. Rocky doesn't take him up on the offer for moral reasons, and the fact that he would return to where he started. If you don't move forward in your view of yourself, you don't stay in the same place, you move backwards. This is because the world is always moving forwards. It's a relativity issue. After this first day, he meets Adrian, and he doesn't share with her, choosing to avoid the truth and condensing it all down to, oh, a million laughs, it was great. Him not sharing with her keeps her in the dark. Her not just supporting his decision means that he doesn't share. It's a vicious cycle. This is how couples stop communicating. Interestingly, it's the same guy who is creating the unease in Rocky's environment. Where's your heart? Tougher than oops? And you really sweep good? Is all the same person. Now, this film had a big enough budget to hire other people, but I think it's making a point. One loud voice can have the illusion of many. This is important to remember, especially now in the comment section age. This weasel is taking his chance to rise up the hierarchy, and others are going to feed off the pressure that he creates. Apollo, in the meantime, is making his assaults on Rocky's honor, his courage, his moniker.
rematch with a timid fellow who calls himself the Italian Stallion. But this man does not have the honor to meet me in the ring. Or is it Scallion? Now listen, what's his name?
I mean, that was the thing that attracted him in the first place, and the core of the achievement of the first fight, which was to not just be another bum. And Apollo reconfirms the notion that the luck was not just in the opportunity, but it was also in the outcome. All of this rhetoric gets Mickey on board, but this doesn't trigger Adrian. The reason is she's not a fighter. She spent her pre-Rocky life being a tolerator, and that's her default. He explains to her that he's not doing what he's supposed to do, his calling, using his skills. She's ignoring the damage to his psychological health because of the fears for his physical health. But they're both important. It's Hobson's choice between the mind and the body. They both must align. Your self-confidence informs your self-esteem. What you can do informs who you are. Who you are influences what you can do. Together, these comprise your self-image. Being told by the doctors he can't do something is causing him to question who he is. If you don't do things in alignment with your best self, you will diminish who you are, your self-esteem, which will reduce your self-image. Adrian's saying,
Rocky, please. You don't have to prove anything.
Is correct to anyone else, but in life we spend our time proving things to ourselves. If you don't, you atrophy your personality. It's either growing or contracting. It's never static because the world is constantly acting upon it. We all need evidence in the I do to create the I am. How you see yourself is the most influential. Apollo needs his evidence, Rocky needs his. Adrian ends up simply saying,
I don't want you to do it.
This is the direct opposite of her role in the first film. Before, she was the catalyst and primary enabler. Now, she's the obstacle. Marriage is evolution. The situations and therefore the concerns will change. She doesn't want him to do it because of fear and protection, but she's imposing her will and desires on another. This is childhood parental love based in protection and looking out for the child's best interests, rather than adult love, which is trading and increasing their self-esteem. There's a spectrum here. Protection and enabling. In relationships, both types of love are present, childhood and adult. They're both love, but they have different purposes and produce different results. Maybe a rule of thumb is use childhood love lots in childhood and less as they become adult, and use it very sparingly with other adults, and only when they act like children, which Rocky isn't. Observe both fighters. For Apollo, Tony has said no. For Rocky, Adrian has said no. The difference is the closeness of the relationship. And Apollo has dragged them both down because he wasn't big or magnanimous enough to accept that he offered a chance and a person took it. Rocky is defining his maleness by a need to compete and fight. And he's not wrong. Rocky and Adrian are not in alignment. They're out of sync. His identity is not just husband or father. His primitive side that he's expressed in his profession is important too. At the press conference, Apollo is aggressive and Rocky is trying to diffuse it with humor. This is an avoidance of conflict tactic. Why is Rocky not getting aggressive? Basically, it's because he's uncertain. Rocky's base support, Adrian, is not backing him. Apollo's wife has not questioned Apollo's abilities. Adrian has indirectly questioned Rocky's ability because of fear of injury. Rocky's replies about "try our best" is an attempt to define the contest by effort, not result. Paulie, Rocky's shadow, actually expresses what Rocky wants to say. Paulie is Rocky's more monstrous side, and this is the first time we see Rocky respect Paulie's disrespect for Apollo. Intuitively, Rocky knows he needs to embrace his darker feelings but he can't at this stage. Rocky is not taking this seriously. There's a role reversal in the same way that Apollo didn't for the first fight. They have different reasons. Apollo was overconfident then. Rocky is underconfident now. But the humor is being read as disrespect. Apollo needs Rocky to take this seriously. An indication of how confused Rocky is that he actually says he wishes Paulie would talk to Adrian. Asking Paulie to solve the problem is a desperate act. Maybe the t-shirt that's full of holes indicates how he feels about himself. The one he trains with properly is complete. He even goes as far as to ask Paulie to work his corner. He's at sea and he's making very poor decisions because he hasn't resolved the issue with his primary support. He just continues to be conflicted. It may be Paulie's not wanting to get involved in the fight when Rocky was looking for a little support boost that upsets Rocky enough for him to contradict himself, telling Paulie not to talk to Adrian. And this is interesting. Paulie is actually correct. The answer is to deal with the source of the problem, and the outcome of the current strategy will be defeat. This is a further illustration that Rocky needs to incorporate the advice of his darker side at certain times. Conflict would be one of those times. This is because Paulie's answer has always been violence and intimidation, which is applicable in a fight, but not as a negotiation tactic with a loved one. Paulie still goes anyway, and in the line, "Didn't I teach you anything?" You see, everyone is the hero of their own story. Paulie sees himself as a teacher who has raised his sister, a father to her. She doesn't see him that way at all. Adrian again reiterates her reasoning for not supporting the fight. Her intention is noble. She's trying to prevent Rocky getting hurt. She says she would never hurt him, but she's so focused on the physical hurt of possible blindness, not the mental or emotional hurt. It's interesting that Paulie's actually correct in his assessment of the situation and solution. He just communicates it in the wrong way. His prediction that her stance will end up working out worse for Rocky is correct, and his solution of her giving support is also correct. Meanwhile, Mickey's trying to revive Rocky's spirit, but he too is using the wrong tactic. He's questioning his courage and using derogatory slurs, the same tactic as Apollo. But this isn't going to work. This is not Rocky's limiting factor. He's lacking positive support, not negative drive. Mickey's anger is generated, though, by the thought of lost promise. And in this, there's an important lesson. Zero love is actually less damaging than no support from loved ones. An absence of love can be filled by the person themselves. No support from loved ones creates another obstacle that has to be overcome. This is because of what love represents. It is esteem. If parents do their job right, they give enough esteem to foster healthy self-esteem, and confidence to foster self-confidence for an adult to go it alone in the world and stake their claim. That adult then finds a partner to help support their adult choices. The issue often comes, though, when two people get their values out of sync. And the problem is that we all have different views on what is virtuous and is not. In a relationship, as each party's decisions affect the other, it's not as simple as just supporting your partner unconditionally. This is why you need to choose your partner very wisely and really understand and know their value system. 10 weeks of knowing someone before marriage massively reduces the chances to make that assessment. If the first film is the effect of making better decisions, then Rocky II deals with the effect of poor decisions on other aspects of a life. The right-minded way to solve this problem is to not have two quick conversations, but to take the time to work it out as a couple, to weigh up the pros and cons together, and to realize that in the event of a stalemate, then the decision has to go to the doer. And the doer in this case is Rocky. Adrian and Mickey are both on opposite sides, and neither of their stances have the desired effect. Mickey tries encouragement, which slides from initially positive to negative. While he's diagnosed that Rocky has a ticker problem, is lacking heart, he hasn't connected the fact that Rocky's emotional heart is Adrian. Again, Mickey would have been better off getting them both around a table and explaining his points to her. Adrian gives birth prematurely and then slips into a coma. Rocky is told this is due to the strain of overwork, and it's interesting that as Rocky supported Adrian's decision to work, even though he didn't think it was best, he provided her with adult love. As she worked voluntarily, he doesn't have to contend with guilt, unlike Paulie, who realizes that his anger in trying to control her has triggered this. Avoid trying to control other adults and just focus on your own lane. The problem is that all too often, people like to try to control others. Once again, the little touches, like the faceless nurse enforcing hospital rules, adds a level of realism to the film, and along with the union rules that have stopped him from working, it seems like there's a commentary on the institutions that are meant to serve the people, like hospitals and unions, have lost touch with their original purpose. There's a lack of empathy for people when they're at their lowest and need a little consideration or help. In these times, when people feel that the external factors in their lives are beyond their control, people turn to the church, another major institution. The chapel, as a house of God, represents the attempt to try to control what is outside of our control. If Rocky is a meditation on the power that you create in your life by making good decisions, Rocky 2 is about the nature of faith for the elements in your life that are not controlled by your decisions. In this film, we've charted Rocky's journey through good decision making from being the center of his, and in that moment, many people's universes, to being insignificant in the universe and powerless. And there is nothing to make you feel more helpless and powerless than bad fortune to a loved one. Rocky has to trust and hope for the best for her, as she did for him while waiting in the changing room in the first fight. And she will need to do this for him if he's going to fight in the future. At the chapel, Mickey tries to re-explain using logic, but logic and emotion must align for congruence, so again it falls on deaf ears. He focuses on the physical issues of not being in shape rather than the emotional issues. However, in the chapel, Mickey has a change of tact, a flash of wisdom, and this is actually where Mickey and Rocky's relationship really starts, when he says,
Now wait a minute, if you want to blow it, if you want to blow this thing, damn it, I'm gonna blow it with you. Do you want to stay here? I'll stay with you. I'll stay with you. Yeah. I'll stay and pray. I gotta lose.
this is true support to an adult. He explains the options, the consequences, and then supports Rocky's decision, whatever that is. And essentially, everything stops. Rocky, Mickey, Paulie. The world seems to stop as Adrian is the center of it. I find it interesting that this part of the film only lasts 4 minutes, but it feels like an eternity. It's not boring, it's just uncomfortable and sad, making it feel much longer than it actually is. Time is extended and drawn out. This is an important lesson about depression. Depression feels longer than it actually is because time appears to slow down. Bleak times are slow times. As the dawn breaks on this dark scene, we come to the part of the film that I personally think sowed the seed for the later diminishing reputation of this franchise as corny and predictable. Rocky expresses that he's willing not to fight. This makes sense from the fact that he's lived through and had his eyes opened through this difficult time. He's been put in Adrian's shoes and has realized that the health of your loved one is so important. He loves her, and now he doesn't want to put her through what he just went through. However, the win scene relies on a change in her that can't be counted on. It's a cheap resolution to some really fascinating questions raised to that point. There's no explanation or reason given. This is obviously for dramatic effect, and dramatically it works, but this is why it's not remembered as fondly in my opinion. It follows a sports formula. The win scene is rushed. In effect, what's changed for Adrian? She's been in a coma all that time, and we don't ever get to see her epiphany, and the reason for the resolution is absolutely crucial. There are some reasons I've put together to explain this unexplained change of heart, and I can understand why possibly no reason was included. The previous scene was all emotion, and giving a logical reason would have affected the pacing and ruined the emotional roller coaster. But just relying on the dramatic effect of the reveal and then the stirring montage, I personally think diminishes the impact of the film overall. It's a short-term massive win, but a long-term loss. While Rocky as a film is remembered as an amazing creation with a lot to say, Rocky 2 doesn't have the same impact. It is possible that Adrian has concluded that as anything can happen at any time, and as her health ended up being the issue, not Rocky's, it's pointless to live life predicting the worst. It's possible that Adrian's change of heart is a miracle underpinning the theme of faith that's so present in this film. It's possible that this was a commentary on the overprotective instincts of a pregnant mother overspilling onto her husband. With the birth of the child, that she wants to name Rocky Jr., the boy is in effect a replacement to Rocky. Up to that point, she's focused on losing Rocky, which would have been self-fulfilling if it had continued. To her now, though, she holds Rocky Jr. in her arms. The baby is the continuation, ensuring that she will not be alone. This frees up Rocky to continue his quest for self-esteem, as she no longer is so emotionally dependent on his survival. Almost like, well, now I have a child, yeah, I can risk losing you. Or, now she can channel her maternal protective instincts into the right vessel, a defenseless baby, rather than the wrong vessel, a 210-pound fighter. But we get no indication, and that's the problem. Now, Rocky's willing to risk the chance of disability, and so is Adrian. And this is another reason why I think that this scene is such a shame, because it had the opportunity to be something truly great. In life, opportunities don't normally come risk-free with no negative consequences like they did in the first film. There's normally a weighing up, a risk assessment. In the first film, there was nothing to lose. But most opportunities involve something to lose. She's now willing to take that risk with him, and it would have added an authenticity to explain why. Any of these are good reasons. Some are better and more realistic than others. But not providing any insight into her rationale, I think affects the legacy that this film had. Essentially though, now we have the following. Apollo wants to fight for negative reasons. Rocky initially took the fight to squash Apollo's negative view of him, and Adrian has given him a positive reason to fight. She's not endorsed the pettiness of tit for tat, as Mickey did. Her position is still, you will never quieten the naysayers, so just do things for positive reasons. And she makes a crystal clear request in the word win. She's saying, if you're going to take such a high risk, then aim for something that is bigger and better than before. Increase the reward. The goal of the first film was about finding his worth, a personal journey. She sets out the goal for the second film. Win. This is not something that is solely in his control, because it involves another person, Apollo, playing their part and losing. But in effect, she's saying, do everything within your control to win. In my opinion, this is why there are two training montages. The first is one of the best depictions of controlled, focused aggression ever put to screen. The reason it is there and first is because if you're going to do everything in your power to win, win is a conflict. A contest of you against others has an emotional foundation of aggression. If you lack the aggression, or you have it and you don't access it to use it, you're not doing everything within your control to win. Now there is natural talent issues here. Some people are naturally more aggressive than others. Aggression is an emotion of choice for disagreeable extroverts. Apollo in this film embodies that. We love Rocky because he's agreeable. Rocky demonstrates in the first montage that you can cultivate and release your inner demon in the right arena, and that's healthy. The scene in between the two montages where he looks after his child shows that you can compartmentalize them though. Feeding and releasing your inner animal doesn't mean you won't be able to still love. Potentially, you'll be able to love more because you won't be spending all that energy trying to repress and contain your inner spirit. So where does this fuel come from? It's the focusing of all the humiliations from Apollo, Mickey, frustrations with Adrian, and the uncontrollables of life like the economy and health. And it's the most glorious and well-earned release for the audience too. The second montage is really just showing the community backing and support. The children running with him after he's nurtured his own child reinforces he's a role model now for the next generation. Maybe this is an appeal to the higher version of himself rather than a Rocky doll or adverts. He's not a disposable toy or a role model for cheap techniques to attract the opposite sex. He's an inspiration to the next generation and those who don't want to let life beat them. The scene with Apollo the night before the fight shows the moment that Apollo finally realizes that this fight is not about Rocky, hence why he screws up the clipping. It's about himself. And here's the point. Rocky in the first film is driven by that photo of himself as a younger child. Both films are about Rocky trying to get back to that. Apollo is focused not on himself, but on someone else. And that's dangerous. The amount of religious symbolism, crosses, churches, chapels, I think is trying to say that there are things in life outside of your control. A faith, whatever faith, even just a faith in yourself, is useful to psychologically cope with the uncontrollables. Most lack the faith in themselves and so defer to an established faith, a off-the-peg type. Whatever floats your boat. In the film though, this culminates in the blessing from the priest. Rocky believes that he needs something more than the factors that he can control in order to win. Rocky is much more calm in his pre-fight ritual, and this is advantageous if the fight goes the distance. Apollo is very hyped, meaning he's going to be more effective at the beginning, but will pay for it at the end. Come the actual fight, Rocky is knocked down in the first and second rounds, and Apollo continues to be unsportsmanlike, but still ostensibly plays by the rules. However, the longer the fight goes on, the more it becomes a psychological issue, and this is because they have different goals. Apollo wants to prove that Rocky is talentless. Every round Rocky survives, Apollo's self-esteem and self-confidence decreases. Essentially, he set himself a near impossible task. Rocky's strength is his willpower, and Apollo has hitched his whole enterprise on beating his opponent's one area where he's utterly world-class. Apollo ignored that resurrection in the 14th round of the first fight, and he's going to pay for it. Conversely, Rocky just wants to win. Every round he survives, his self-esteem and self-confidence rises. At the end of the 14th round, Mickey tells him to switch, and Rocky equates the switch to a trick and unsportsmanlike act. He's looking at it through a moral lens, and that's a poor decision. There's a rigidity in Rocky's thinking, a stubbornness that is probably the very factor that keeps him on his feet. It does mean he is slow to reason change. However, he's not slow to act on it. In the 15th round, he swaps back to his old style, and in that right decision, at the right time, he knocks down an exhausted Apollo. However, his own exhaustion causes him to fall too. Apollo's inability to rise is not because of the blow itself. It's because Apollo has effectively beaten himself. His goal was to dominate and prove that the other fighter was of no worth. Although Apollo has done everything he can, his goal was too far out of his control. Goals need to be as much within your control as possible to have a high chance of success. Rocky's victory marks a healthier way to win. Set a goal that is largely within your control, but that requires some elements of luck, and then work towards it diligently and have faith, or what I call the perspective, that luck will be on your side when you need it. Essentially, remain positive about the uncontrollables, because no one ever won from being negative. He thanks his opponent for bringing this out in him, his trainer and God, which for him is the power to take care of the uncontrollable variables. He then references his child as his greatest accomplishment, with the title coming second, instituting a hierarchy of importance. Your real legacy are your children, not titles or accomplishments. So why is there so much God in this film? If the concept of God is the best that we can aspire to, then realizing that simultaneously we are powerful and powerless is vital. This film is about accepting that life isn't just a fairy tale. Bad things happen out of your control, and if it is out of your control, things like the economy, health, winning, all you can do is prepare. Give everything by ordering and aligning your life, find motivation, and then aim all of that for the best that you can ever envisage for yourself. And as he throws the belt over his shoulder and is frozen there, this again is trying to be a life lesson in how to win. I do really enjoy this film. I'm just a little disappointed that they didn't take the opportunity to resolve that Rocky and Adrian conflict in a meaningful way. The magic of the first film is that it seems real enough because it's based on a real situation, and Stallone crafted realistic characters that made sense psychologically. I'm sure that there were emotional and time considerations, and also it would have been hard to resolve it script-wise while keeping the emotional and dramatic impact of her change of heart out of the blue. But in not doing that, I think that it scuppered the potential for this film to be as iconic as the first. And that's the reason why Captain America had a question mark next to it on his list. Anyway, hit the thumbs up if you like this video, and have your say in the comments bay about this video. And please don't use it as a place to just be entitled and say, "Where's my sprint video?" I pity the fool that doesn't ring the notification bell, because I'm going to do Rocky 3 next. And if you like my vibe, please subscribe.